Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion, and I'm your host for this episode of Recorded Content. This show is brought to you by Motion. It's a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. All right, if your company is creating a category, it's important to use content to educate your ideal buyers. But if you're a marketer and you're not an expert in the type of technology you sell, how do you create content that passes the BS test? How do you make sure the information you share is detailed enough for your target audience to even care? Well, Adam McQueen believes a podcast is the answer. Adam is the content marketing manager at Klue, which is a competitive enablement company. And in this episode, we'll learn why Adam believes launching a podcast was the best decision he's made since running content at Klue. Well, Adam, first things first, thanks for joining me on Recorded Content today.
Tristan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. As I was checking out your background, I noticed that you were a staff writer following the Toronto Raptors. Why leave the championship team? Very similar to what Kawhi Leonard did and go into tech.
Why'd I leave the sports writing and going into tech? Well, I was doing my master's in journalism in Vancouver over at UBC, and I was playing rugby, kind of eyeing up playing professional rugby, writing on sports on the side, and I dove in throughout my whole postgrad. I just pretty much school was on the side, and I ended up just writing on the Raptors full time. Loved it, but as it went along, the career path from specifically journalism and within the sports industry, when COVID hit, it kind of got rattled, especially if you're new and you don't have a firm footing in yet. So yeah, it kind of, as COVID hit around March time, it was, all right, what's next? And I wasn't entirely sure. Some friends of mine were in the tech industry in Vancouver, which is starting to grow really quickly. I was completely unaware of what the tech world looked like. I didn't know that Vancouver was becoming a tech hub. And I kind of just got paired up with a couple mentors that were journalists turned content marketers, specifically in the tech space. They kind of started to give me a lay of the land. I thought I knew what was going on. Now I look back 2 years on, like I had no idea what was going on, but fortunately, I joined a tech company out here, a SaaS company called Klue, and they kind of saw they appreciated the journalistic approach to content marketing and kind of invested in me before I really knew what I was doing from a content marketing perspective.
Yeah, and Adam, Klue is a competitive enablement platform, is how the category is defined. So what did you know about what competitive enablement was? Zero?
Zilch. I knew nothing. I knew nothing at all. But what I did like about when I started to kind of dig into what Klue was and spoke with our marketing director, talked to our CEO, is although I didn't know exactly what competitive enablement was or competitive intelligence, the concept of competing, that resonated with me. As someone that's been in sports, being an athlete all my life, I was like, oh, okay. So I don't get the nuts and bolts, but you're helping businesses compete and beat other businesses at like the enterprise level, some of the biggest names. Okay, that's interesting to me. Where can I get involved?
Got it. And so you have this background as a sports writer. You like the competition aspect. Like what is the buyer on the other side that, who is the audience that you're writing for, that you're connecting with as a marketer at Klue? Can you describe that for me?
Yeah, so typically it's product marketers. They're in charge of competitive enablement at their organizations. So product marketers obviously wear a lot of different hats, be it messaging, helping with sales enablement, sales collateral, and then also monitoring what competitors are doing and how to enable their reps, product teams, exec team on beating the competition. So typically it's been a lot of product marketers, but it also varies. At the enterprise level, there'll be companies that have dedicated competitive teams, and they will It's not the exact same as a product marketer, but yeah, at the enterprise level, they'll have more robust teams with more than one person dedicated to competitive research.
Okay, and that person is working obviously on the product marketing side, but then they're also feeding information into sales as well to help win those deals?
100%. And that's the key. That's the key where Klue is trying to unlock that partnership even better. Helping bring product marketing closer to the revenue engine. The best product marketers that I talk to are able have this. They work in lockstep with the sales team. They're sharing messaging with them on competitors. Sales are giving them information back on what they hear on calls, what they're hearing about competitors, and it's just like there's this virtuous cycle, a feedback loop, right? The product marketers that struggle are the ones that have no visibility. They feel like they're living in not an ivory tower because that puts them up here, but they feel like they're in a silo. They can do all this research. They whip up all this interesting messaging that's interesting in their mind. They share it out. They spew it out to sales reps. No one looks at it. No one. Sales are busy.
Yeah.
Why would they? Why are they going to use messaging from someone that doesn't talk to people on calls? Isn't in the field every day. Why should I trust them when I'm talking to buyers every single day? So that's like the good side and the bad side from a product marketing perspective.
Got it. So you've learned some of that as you've been there for a year and a half, but what were some of those first steps that you took? What parts of that journalist's background did you use to really get up to speed as quickly as you could in those early parts?
Man, even just for trying to reflect back, it's hard to reflect back on how little I knew, and I still don't know that much. I get is you're always learning, right?
Yeah.
But 18 months ago, God, I had no dang idea. And coming in as like running content, you're speaking directly. The content you create is going straight out to our audience. Like you're sort of the filtered voice of Klue in some ways when you're running social, running the blog. And I'm like, shoot, I don't want to be BSing people. Like imposter syndrome was real, like so real. So in order to kind of figure out how to speak about this, even just get an idea of what product marketers, what their pains are, what they're doing, how people that are running competitive enablement, how they're doing it successfully. It started internally. I got directed to our best reps, our sales reps,
Hmm.
and said, give me the lowdown. I need to just sit in, listen to demo calls, listen to you talk to product marketers, give me your 2 cents on what pain points are the biggest ones, where the value of our space, our category fits with them. And then also on the customer success side, we were small enough at that point in time that I could have easy one-on-one conversations, and customer success folks would also give me their kind of post-sales perspective on what leads to success rather than the pre-sales perspective. There's alignment, but there's always a little bit different
Yeah.
there. And then that kind of dovetailed into just actually getting to talk to customers themselves and buyers themselves.
Okay.
And yeah, that was how you got the perspective.
And tell me, Adam, what was that first piece of content like that you created when you joined? Was it a blog post? Was it a short video? Like, what was that first assignment that you had?
Oh man, this is a funny one. Me and my marketing director joke about this all the time. So I got hired right before our Series A funding, and I got tasked alongside our marketing director Katie to create an ebook, a guide to competitive intelligence. But I didn't know anything about competitive intelligence, so my first task was writing this copy. It was a lot of like repurposing, digging through what had already been written and patching that together, putting that together into like this other bigger downloadable piece of content. I don't want to look back at what that thing looks like, the output. It was not great. It was not great. And I mean, we were working in this fast growing startup
Yeah.
that it was go, go, go. I mean, when you come in a week before Series A and there's a big announcement coming and stuff's about to go down, it was immediately go by executing. And that was honestly a good thing. Like it sucked then, but then a lot of being a good content marketer is trial and error, learning by doing. You can read and listen as much as you want to experts and whatnot, but it's also just doing. And then you start to figure out what resonates and what's good content and what's bad content.
Yeah, and you said, like, when you put that together, it didn't feel great, right? You're pulling in all this information, you're brand new to tech and also just this category as well. So what what kind of steps did you go through to figure out, all right, this needs to be better, needs to be more specific. I need to be able to write something that hits on the details. Like, what were you looking to do to maybe not repeat that same mistake that for the next big project that you had? What were you searching for?
It was to get the voice of the expert. I couldn't be the expert and feel confident writing, creating content, whatever that content would be, with an authoritative voice. And that's what we needed to do. When we're creating a category, when we're creating competitive enablement, it's a space where you need to educate your buyer. You need to educate them a ton. And I didn't feel confident doing that. So I needed to figure out a way to get a voice of the expert in. And so that was originally through, the customer success team kind of linking me with successful customers that could help provide me quotes for my first couple blogs, give me a perspective on, what do you do to kind of build the partnership with sales, for example, that kind of thing. I take the quotes, weave them into my blog so that now it's this sort of journalistic approach, right? When I'm writing in journalism, it's not always about my perspective. It's bringing in the experts, handing over the mic, letting them talk, giving them oxygen to share their perspective. And that's what I started to do. And that was sort of the seeds, kind of the foundation, I guess, towards, why don't we just try and make a podcast? So that's
Yeah.
sort of how it began. And then it evolved into, launching the podcast maybe 4 months in. I was like, let's just go for it. Let's do it. And we dove in and we haven't looked back since.
So you're doing some interviews, you're working with the customer success team. You're pulling in some of those quotes, like you said, to help fill in some of the gaps. And you're new to this industry, and that's what you're working with. You're using some of those, journalism instincts, right? That you're bringing over from your background. How did you present this idea of a podcast, or where did the idea come from?
Dang. I think it's because COVID, everyone started a podcast, didn't they?
If they did, it seems like it. Yeah.
No, so for me, just my own, because when you create content, it's like, first thing is like, okay, what organic traffic can we capture? What are the keywords we need to target? I'm like, wait, how do I consume a content?
Hmm.
And obviously I'm a sample size of one, but for me, I'm an avid podcast listener, whether it's sports, whether it's news, whether it's culture, whether it's something to do now related to my workspace. I love being able to listen to content. I love the audio element. And so that was sort of like this moment is like, okay, content isn't just like writing your blog. Like there are tons of different ways to create this. Um, and so as I started to think that through, I'm like, I'm having these great interviews with people. Why don't I just broadcast them? Why don't I just show them? And then as I started to build out sort of a business case for the podcast itself, as to make it become one of our distribution channels, one of our pillars of our content, was one of the things that I started to kind of piece together or realize is, this doesn't have to come at the expense of other pieces of content. It doesn't have to come at the expense of like posting on social. This can be the thing that posts on social. It becomes sort of this fuel, this engine that drove all the other pieces of content. So that was sort of the watershed moment or the light bulb moment. It's like, we can create this. I'm already doing these interviews, but it
Mhm.
also can become a content pillar, a part of our engine, or so to speak.
And Adam, what did that plan look like? So when you go to present that to management, how did you eventually get buy-in and the thumbs up from everyone at Klue?
Shoot, I should have asked Katie, our marketing director, before this, because it's hard to remember that exact moment. I've honestly got to say though, like I'm blessed with the team that we have at Klue. Like, so I was the third marketing hire. Our first marketing hire, Katie, who was doing everything as a team of one. She
Hmm.
has that sort of vision. She wants to do stuff different. She wants to be creative with marketing. She doesn't want to be the same old B2B tech company in terms of the content we create and the marketing we do. And it all trickles down from our CEO as well. Jason, our CEO, marketing background. He's constantly pushing the envelope. And before I even knew what I was doing, he was trying to get me to push the envelope. So there was this implicit encouragement to really hand over the content engine to me and be like, yo, level this up. What do people
Hmm.
care about? How are you going to provide content that actually people are going to consume, find interesting, take stuff away, share with their friends? So there was an implicit approval, even request. I mean, that's the job.
Yeah.
Level this up. And so in terms of the buy-in, they were waiting for it. It was, how do you present this in a way that you think is going to be successful? And what I guess the way that I did get buy-in is I did a full presentation. I shared like, these are the topics I want to hit to start with. Here's the way I will produce this podcast. Here's how I'm going to break down this content into other pieces of micro content. Here's how it's going to feed into our blog. Here's how it's going to become a staple of what we post on social. Here's how I'm going to use it in email distribution. And so really once you kind of present it like that, I got the green light to just go. And thankfully, and I'm sure we'll get into this along the ways, that you don't just it's not a success overnight. You're not just going to have thousands of listeners immediately. And to being allowed that opportunity and space to work, iterate, and slowly grow the podcast from where it was then to now was another key to its success.
Yeah, I like that mindset, the ability to iterate along the way, kind of build your foundation to begin with, and then add layers on top. And one of the things I saw was you started with internal folks first at Klue. So I noticed that early on in the podcast. And talk to me why you felt that was important to take that approach as a jumping off point.
The reason I started internally, one was time. It was easiest, is the most frictionless way to get produced content. And we had some smart people in Klue. Our customer success manager, Alex Organ, kills it. And I'm like, I had these conversations with her. Like I told you at the beginning of my whole journey here, I was like, who should I learn from? And I start to learn from her. And I'm like, okay, you're feeding me this gold right now. You're feeding me gold. Why don't you just feed our audience gold too? Because you've got stuff to say that is valuable to our audience. So I think it was just like, in terms of like, let's get this thing moving to begin with. We know it's not going to blow up overnight, but I want to get some of our internal Klue folks out there, showcase them as experts that they are. They know this space. And then from there, I can start to make you start to make the requests to customers or friendlies, and you start to build this natural network within the product marketing communities and that stuff to bring them on board. It's easy to bring a customer on and be like, hey, we've done 3 or 4 episodes. Here's a sample of like the things we're gonna want to touch. Love you to join us. Than being like, hey, never done this before. Probably gonna screw up like 27 times, which I did in the
be our
first couple
guinea pig.
episodes.
Yeah.
Golly day. The editing those, when I was doing the editing all solo too, like that was a time. But yeah, not putting a customer on the first episode was time, and I was just like, I need some trial reps.
So what was something you screwed up early on?
What was something I didn't screw up to begin with, man? God, I was trying to read off of a script too much.
Yeah.
And I think that was a combination of like still being, again, I was so new to the space that even like trying to figure out the exact questions I wanted to ask. And I felt like I needed to kind of add my 2 cents, but I also didn't know the space too well. So I was like kind of trying to read this preordained script. I was taking the air out of the conversation. Sometimes I'd butt in a bit. I was just more nervous. You know, it takes a while to feel comfortable on the mic on conversations, because it can be daunting to begin with, even though there's no live audience in front of you. So those were a couple of the big screw-ups. Plus I said, but, it's like 7,200 times. And like going back and editing, I'm like, I need to stop this in order to like be able to do the rest of my job, because my whole day is cutting out ums and buts at this point right now on the editing side.
So you record those first few episodes with members of Klue internal, and then you have to figure out how to get this to a finished product. And that, it sounds like that was on your shoulders.
It was to begin with, yeah, for sure. And that was sort of, I guess, part and parcel of like, look, go. I got the green light to go, but it's also like, you've kind of pitched this. I felt like I had to take ownership to do this to begin with. It was definitely difficult as a team of one. I wouldn't recommend it, because I think it was a great way to understand how it's doing it as a team of one was incredibly difficult. Wasn't scalable if you want to do it on a consistent basis. Everyone could do their podcast at a different cadence. I had this vision, was like, I want to make this thing weekly. That was not tenable as a individual with minimal tech stack. However, it was also good to kind of get an eye into, shoot, there's a lot more to it than just recording an interview and chucking it out there. There's a lot that goes into distribution. There's a lot that goes into post-production editing. There's a lot that goes into thinking through the clips or the hooks that are of interest to your audience when you want to bring people into this. How are we
Right.
going to put them into ads? Those kind of things. It was great to get an eye in, like, okay, this is how much time is dedicated to really making this podcast successful. And as I kind of had some modest success, I think it was more the content quality was good, but the distro and the production quality wasn't good enough. Was when I talked to my marketing director about, okay, what can we do next to maybe bring in someone? I was really fortunate to bring in my first content hire was a guy that had audio production experience.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was a blessing. But no, that was as a team of one, it became incredibly difficult to produce it at a quality rate.
You're kind of going through some of these early stages. You're feeling the burn essentially, and then trying to figure out how to backfill and bring in some other support. So what did that allow you to do? Like, how are you preparing for episodes? Because as the host, you're guiding these
Mm.
conversations every time. So what are you doing on the front end to make sure that you get those right hooks and the things that really relate to your audience?
Yeah, this is an interesting one actually, and I think I've developed a better process for this over time. Now that I've kind of got I kind of build a rapport or relationship, and I have returning guests, and it's really having a clear idea on like what the topic you want to talk about is. It's like providing guidelines around what the conversation is going to be, but don't box it in too much. There's like a
Yeah.
delicate balance, and what I found one of the first things too, actually, for making good content. Sorry, before all of this is don't talk about like, especially if it's a customer, sometimes they were hardwired to just kind of talk about our solution and our product. I'm like, this is
Hmm.
not about that. This is about educating the market. This is to help product marketers learn how to do competitive enablement effectively. So that was actually one of the first things is like, okay, ground rules. We're not here to sell. We're not here to
Right.
pitch our product. We're here to educate the market. And then from there, what I like to do is do a pre-call with the first couple people to kind of just build rapport a little bit to begin with. And then work with the guest to figure out sort of like the high level topics. Not we're gonna can every single question. I can't stand it being like that. But like here are the topics we want to touch. Sort of like get a little meta here. Sort of like what you did with me for this podcast interview.
Hmm.
You're like, here's kind of the general concept framework that we're gonna work within, and then let's just ride with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the approach I tend to take, and sometimes I do a pre-call, sometimes I don't. Like, we didn't do a pre-call here because I wanted to really narrow in on and really the genesis of this conversation stems from one of your LinkedIn posts because I just saw it out there and I was
Yeah,
like,
man.
"Damn, this is a perfect topic because we're going to be able to bring on Adam and understand, like, his evolution as a marketer through the lens of a podcast, and that's really all it came from. And sometimes it is just something very small. You don't need like this huge idea to tackle each time, and that's interesting for you is like how do you, with these folks that you're trying to build rapport with, and you're learning so much about the industry. Like how do you narrow in on that one or maybe two, three things that you want to tackle in an episode?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I originally just had because it's like classic like marketing is like your best ideas come at like maybe 2 a.m. at night. So
Yeah,
I literally just started with just like a Google sheet or a Google Docs, like ideas I think would be cool, like topics I
yeah,
think we should hit. And like I'm a naturally curious guy.
yeah,
So as I'm learning this space, I keep kind of like talking myself down, like I didn't know anything, I'm a dummy. But I was like, I didn't know anything, but I was curious. So I'm starting to put piece things together. I'm like, oh, so one thing we see is like the most successful product marketers have this really tight relationship with sellers. Explore how, what are they doing? What's the bad examples? What are the good examples? And so I would kind of just brain dump all of these questions that I had.
hmm,
And then I would work with my own marketing team. And then as I start to build relationships with like like customer success, I'm like, yo, do you have any good examples of customers or people in the industry that just do a killer job partnering with sales? What did they do? And just kind of doing my own kind of intel and research. And then from there, these disparate ideas that I'm just chucking down sort of like coalesced into these like little topics. Now it wasn't clean
yeah.
every single time, and it's very much like a work in progress. I kind of am subscribe to the notion of like you don't want to over organize.
Yeah.
I thrive in the chaos a little bit still to this day. It's just
So Adam, what
how
is
I
that?
roll.
Is it a Google Doc? Is it Notion? Like where are all these ideas getting stored?
It was definitely a Google Doc to begin with. The process, we've moved a bit of it to Notion now with the guy Ben, who helps produce and distribute some of the content too. But yeah, I don't think I'd recommend just doing the Google Doc way. It depends on how much the Google Doc way, and just like chucking down these ideas and then kind of bucketing them into topics and then fitting like a potential guest to that probably wasn't the most efficient way. And if you're trying to do it, depending on the cadence you're trying to do it at, you're gonna be on that hamster wheel of like create, create, create. But
Yeah.
no, it was pretty bare bones. It was a pretty bare bones approach. And the one thing I did start to realize though is, although I don't want to over prescribe or make it too narrowed in, when you do have that topic with a bit more clarity, I can immediately tell that the podcast. I noticed that when I listen back to recordings, those podcast episodes were the better ones. They had a bit more clear direction.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a difficult one, right? Because you want the thing I love about podcasts is they're conversational in nature. You get to meet meet the personality. There's so many like listeners I managed to like talk to, connect with, chat with when we do our live podcast episodes too with the audience, like that we can engage with. But you also, we're here to like educate. You can't just BS and chit chat and just go all over the place. There needs to be some direction too. So
That's
again,
right.
there's like a delicate balance to it, right?
Yeah, and consistency is a big piece to your show so far. I mean, I went back and looked. I think there's 25, almost 30 episodes that you produced. You have this, it looks like twice per month is the pretty predictable cadence that you've put in place. Like what has been the secret to that consistency? What once you got through those first few episodes at first?
Grit. Nah, grit, man. There was definitely times, and it was funny because I was seeing more and more stuff about podcasts, like 90, what's this? You probably know this. That was it. Like 90% of podcasts end after the 12 episode because
Yeah.
it's a heavy lift, and you're not going to see results right away. And that can be super dispiriting. And I probably did the first 15 episodes fully solo, and it was some like modest success, but it was like, dang, what are we going to do next? Because the
Well,
results probably aren't bearing out the effort put
yeah.
in a little bit.
What's modest success mean? Is that compared to like what you were looking for, or what exactly
Yeah,
would that?
it was like you originally like immediately I was like the metric to care about is downloads. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, getting like a couple hundred here,
Mhm.
100 there. Maybe this one didn't land as much. But then you get the odd qualitative feedback. But then what I started to realize is the qualitative feedback, and internally and externally, I almost value that more than just like straight download numbers. Now I can look at download numbers and I can see just topics that hit that people want to listen to.
Yeah.
Listen times will help me like understand what really resonated. But it really started like to get over that hurdle was when I started to just get the initial qualitative feedback, like, oh, there are humans out there that are actually listening to this and enjoying this. And I definitely tried to start promoting people to give feedback. I would promote episode before and like, I'm bringing X expert on. We're going to talk about why. Do you have questions? I would even do that
Mhm.
internally so that you can kind of bring people into the show, bring people into the fold and make them feel like a part of it. I can talk about that too, is like how we've now actually do like a monthly live episode of the podcast where it's literally just like a mini community. We had 100 people on for an hour straight talking all about competitive selling. Like just a week ago, it was one of my favorite episodes we ever done. But um, sorry to go back to go back to the point is that when you're hitting that moment where how do you persevere through is like that qualitative feedback that okay, there is a little bit of traction, there is something working here, and kind of just I don't know, just keep pushing through. Believe that in the quality of the content first and foremost. It has to be a worthwhile listen, and then from there start to work on the distribution a bit more effectively too.
Yeah, and Adam, you mentioned repurposing some of the live stuff that you're doing. You've transitioned to that, right? It sounds like you're doing that once a month. And I saw like I think it was the second or third episode was a repurposed webinar. So you've played with the format a little
Mm.
bit. You're using internal interviews. You're bringing on other subject matter experts externally to Clue, and then now you're folding in this live component, like how do you think that change up in format has helped you in the show?
Yeah, so like you said, like it was bi-weekly, like our podcast was bi-weekly, and like I said, it was to help educate me, educate advisors, like learn about the space. How do you do competitive enablement? It was very like nuts and bolts kind of
Hmm.
thing of like how do you build the program? What do you need to care about? And that was really cool. But as we started to get a bit more traction, I noticed like a bit more frequency. I was posting more frequently episodes was
Hmm.
actually causing it to get a larger follow and more downloads. And so what I did with changing up the format was like, okay, what can we do that's interesting? And so, for example, now on our weekly schedule is like once a month, we're going to do an episode where we just do myself and our content writer, we just do a deep dive onto like how two big name businesses are competing with each other. So we do like a Tesla V-dub. It's not even about
Hmm.
how do you do competitive enablement. These are this is a really interesting space. The electric vehicle market is popping off. How is Tesla handling all the competition coming into the fray? Like it's more like topical. It's more, it can attract a broader audience than just people that are like, yes, I do competitive enablement. It becomes a bit more universal. And that's what I love about the nature we talk about, like competition in business is super interesting. And then another like change up we did, was like now on a monthly cadence, we do a live podcast. It's like a webinar, it's like a Q&A, it's like an AMA. Essentially, I have a guest or two lead. It's going to be around a certain topic. I'll have a bunch of topics to hit, but I'm just bringing people into the fold. I'll bring people on camera to ask their questions. We've had some great experts come in, and the thing that really helped with that I actually noticed from a metric standpoint is because I'll send them everyone that signed up. So say we got 300, 400 registrants to our live. I called it Competitive Enablement Live. It's just like a live version of the podcast. I get 400 people register for it, and then say 100 show up and they're listening through live for a whole full hour. That's great to me. Qualitative feedback. I see the questions asked. That'll be topics I'll probably hit in the future as well. But then also after the show is I'll send them the podcast. I'll be like, I put the whole episode on my podcast feed. Go check it out, and then I'll to all the people that registered, even those that didn't attend, and I'll immediately see a spike in like my subscribers on Spotify podcasts.
Yeah.
Those episodes just naturally, it's almost like another distribution channel, right? Like those episodes will naturally get new followers that didn't even know of the podcast existence, but through whatever way they wanted to join in and come to this like live session. That's been really good. So yeah, there's a long-winded answer, but essentially diversifying what we talk about makes it fresh for me as well, because it can be a bit repetitive if you're just talking about the same thing every single time. So now we kind of have like these different topic buckets, and we just test it out, see what lands, see what didn't land,
Yeah.
and having faith that we're just going to put our best foot forward in the quality of the content we create. That's all you can go by to start with, and then you can start to measure. But don't be worried beforehand, be like, oh, we're shaking up the way we do our podcast. Like this is the way we've always done it. Like, no one cares. The listener's probably going to appreciate there's something that you've tried something, you've tested
Yeah.
something. And yeah, that's something that I've kind of learned as we've gone along here.
There's a lot of information out there that says your audience wants something very predictable and they want the same thing every week. They want to know that they can count on it. But on the flip side, I mean, I've personally found that it's a lot more fun to change up formats because I'm very similar, Adam. I mean, we do solo episodes, we do just interviews. My co-founder and I get on the mic and we talk through a topic very similar to the competition angle that you're
Yeah, man.
taking. And I love that because I think the big thing as a host, you have to maintain that curiosity and that interest level because if you don't, it's going to bleed into the content that you create, right? It's
Mm.
not going to be as good. And that brings me to what I want to uncover a little bit is how you're using all these different formats and then how are you breaking them apart and distributing them? Because you mentioned Tesla and I saw that video that came out on LinkedIn. You had a short clip there. Like what are you doing with that big episode to then get it out into all these different places?
Yeah, so the big episode, the full podcast, because you got to be real too, right? Is people are busy. They're not going to necessarily listen to your full podcast episode, right? Like even like for example, as a podcast, like I said, I'm an NBA head. Trade deadline's coming up. My favorite podcast has a trade deadline bonanza, whatever. That's completely catered towards me. I haven't been able to finish it yet. I listen to it in chunks when I can because I'm busy. I
Yeah.
got a puppy to look after. I got work to do. So you gotta understand that, like, that's why I don't hold the metric of like listen time. Like, it's good to see longer listen times, but like they're not going to consume your whole podcast then and there. Like, no one sits down for an hour and a half and listens fully through. At least a vast majority don't. So it's time to break down the content because there's so many different valuable lessons, hooks, interesting pieces that come within an hour long or 30-minute conversation. It's almost like finding the headline or the interest point on a social video clip. It was like, okay, we've got the video, let's put them on social. But as you start to see on LinkedIn, a lot of people post podcast clips on social now, and it almost can fade into the noise again. So what can we do to change it up? What's the hook? What's the interest point? What's the thing that's a little bit different that make people stop and listen to this 30-second, 1-minute clip? So it's really not only like the hard chop these up and put it onto social, but think through the hook so much. Like, that's my like number one lesson through all of these distributing micro versions of your podcast episode is, what is the thing that's going to make someone stop and either open that email, read that blog, read that LinkedIn post, or even watch that video snippet? Like, you need to think through that before just thinking you're ticking a box by sending it out in your newsletter or things like that. So
As a journalist, Adam, like, how do you find that because you mentioned hook is important. Like, what are some of those things that you look for as you go back through that episode?
one of my favorite things I realized as I was going along more is people like stories. People like real examples. And it's on you as the interviewer I like to set people up ahead of time now too and be like, I'd love some examples on this, but I'll try and pull real examples out of people because the stories are more memorable rather than like I could have a guest come on here and say, building as a product marketer, you need to build a partnership with sales. You need sales buy-in. I did it by presenting at the SKO and showing how this will impact revenue. And it's like, okay. But like getting those like real stories in the moment, like you just did with me, like what was the first piece of content you created? What was the biggest screw up on your first episode? Like telling those real stories are way more human. People will remember those more, and the guests themselves start to open up and you get to hear their real voice, I think, a bit more. It's a little bit less canned, and they'll start to just tell like an interesting story. Like I remember, for example, I was asking, who was it? It was Scott Kim. I was like, okay, how do you get executive approval for competitive at your program? Like to get budget, like how do you prove value? And he was just like, he went on to this whole diatribe about like how terrible his team's win rates were. I'm like, whoa, like people don't usually want to share that stuff. He's like, win rates suck. This was going on, that was going on. And he just told us like, he had this passion in his voice. The story had a good like kind of arc to it, conflict, a little bit of a resolution, a bit of color to it, a bit of flavor to it. And he brought his own perspective. And so getting those real stories was like a key to being like, oh, here's the hook. And then I can work through like some of the copy, and we know the general topics we want to hit and what resonates with our audience a bit, or what the message we want to share with the audience. But the real stories was kind of like, this is the meat of the clips I'll be able to share.
And that is the key too. And I've said that on a few LinkedIn posts where to stand out sometimes just with your podcast, if you get those specific examples, that is really it. And you have an infinite number of possibilities too. The more people you bring on, the more conversations you have, the more very specific examples you get. And if you do it on that level, you're not on this hamster wheel because you are getting a lot of different, examples to shine through on your show. So once you have those, Adam, once you've pulled out those pieces, you're doing short videos. I'm assuming you're building this out on the written side as well. Like what else goes into that on the distribution side?
Yeah, on the distro side, so like I've talked a lot about like kind of these social clips, and now we have someone running our social media that's far better at just kind of spicing up the clips and my canned templates I was creating back in the day. But the content still matters the most than just the bells and whistles. On the distro side, one thing actually I started to notice actually from the episodes is people internally, like so sales kind of sharing these clip episodes out with their potential buyers, customer success managers sharing with clients were like, it's great, do you have like a written version? Do you have a written version of the podcast? And I was like, so I started to try and make these like big blogs around the episode, which is good, but also time consuming.
Hmm.
And so one thing that we've just started doing, and we've just developed like our own podcast page on the site, but with each relevant episode, I like to just write like a 3 key takeaways, like like a spark notes of the episodes in a written form for someone that that doesn't have time to listen to a 45-minute conversation, or just won't remember as well through audio and wants to just quickly scan. And so that's another really cool distribution piece that we're starting to do now that I'm seeing benefits. You can just show like, here are the 3 biggest takeaways from the episode. And it's like headline, again, hooky headline, a relevant quote from the guest that speaks to that headline. And then just like, it doesn't have to be more than 4 or 5 sentences explaining
Hmm.
that topic or explaining that concept or explaining that part of the conversation. It's already there. It really doesn't take that much time because the conversation has already been done. The meat is there. You know what you talked about. It's just almost like just sharing those bits out. Like, oh, after an episode, I'll be like, these are the 3 bits that I love the most of the conversation. My producer man's like, yep, I agree, or I love this bit. We whip those up in there. Other parts of distribution too is we have a regular newsletter and our email list as well. As I like to, if it's a really good episode, I like to just share the episode to our like broader list. And I've kind of built a bit of trust with our audience too. It's like, okay, I'm probably not going to share some junk. Like I'll lead with like the value of it. Why I thought this is a really good episode. Write like a human on all of our emails. We write like overly human. It's probably it's probably a bit jarring, some of our emails. And then yeah, we also put it into our regular newsletter. Like we'll chunk like a clip or the highlights or just that one interesting piece, and that will be in the newsletter as well. So that's another one of our distribution channels.
Yeah. So I see you experimenting with a lot of different things, a lot of
Mm.
different ways to, get these messages out there. Like, what's something that you're looking forward to building in maybe on the near horizon that you haven't tested yet?
One thing we just started on Friday that we haven't done yet is sharing the clips as ads too. That's gonna be a cool
Yeah.
piece. Advertising, like, and it's not like, yes, the ads call to action is go to our new podcast page where you'll find a bunch more dope content. But it's just like sharing the message. Because again, the whole point of category creation and how content fits into category creation is educating the market. So just providing those clips that have the most educational value or the most intrigue, just share them out, flood them out, and getting to share them as an ad is another. I'm just intrigued to see how that resonates with our audience. I'll speak with our demand gen manager about sort of like the numbers on that, but it's just another interesting opportunity to. It's not just to like convert the people, but like just spread the message. What our perspective is on competitive, how product marketers and compete teams should be running competitive enablement. That's going to be a pretty sweet distribution channel. Another one actually that I haven't touched on yet is communities. Like these third-party communities. There's a lot of different product marketing communities that I kind of bounce around in. Like I talk to different product marketers. I actually
Hmm.
source guests in these communities. I'll have one-off conversations. I'll share some of my content in there because it's relevant. And I'm hoping to partner with some of the communities as well to share some of the theme. Like for example, the Tesla VDub. We wanted to make a series of those. Those are kind of these. I think they're high value. Like we make a written version, audio version, video version. Partnering with communities to distribute these too. Co-market. They've got there's a audience of 15-20,000 people that are your relevant audience right there and then. It's a delicate balance, that one, because again, that's why I always want to provide value and educate and not sell. Because if you come in as like I'm part of a company that sells to product marketers, so I'm in a product marketing community, and there might already be that inclination to be like, yo, this guy's about to sell me something hard. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no,
Here
that's
it
not what we're
comes.
trying to do here. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't last a week as a seller. I'm telling you, I'm not good enough at that. I wouldn't be able to do that. Partner with these communities and the people within the communities, just engaging with them and sharing the content in there too. The interesting takeaways. I mean, I even take the video clips and share them just as an MP4, not driving them somewhere, just put the value in the community as well. So
Yeah. And Adam, if we go back to how you were, referencing your knowledge in the industry at the beginning of the conversation, now that you're 25, 30 episodes in, I mean,
mm.
how have you changed as a marketer in this competitive enablement space?
Oh, like night and day. And the funny thing is, I still always defer to the expert. Not always defer, but I need to be real that like I have not ran competitive enablement at another company. So I don't have that first person lived experience, but I've also talked to hundreds now.
Mhm.
I've also like talked in great depth with so many different product marketers, so many different compete leads about the pains they face, the experiences they've had. And I mean, it's what we live and breathe here over at our company. And so my confidence, the cool thing is now I'm building my perspective. I'm building a point of view, and that helps add like another texture or layer to a podcast conversation, right? Now, instead of just teeing up questions for my guest, I can provide context to their question. I can add more follow-ups with a bit more thought. I can even sometimes with guests that I've got good rapport with and I think will be comfortable with is like I can push back a little bit. I can we can kind of bounce off each other a lot more because you're more fluent in the language, right? So I would say it just that that piece of just exposure, right? Exposure, exposure, exposure. I always consciously, actually, my marketing director was like, I want you to start building your own perspective. Don't feel like just because you're in content and you're in marketing, you can't have a perspective. I love what you've done to hand the mic over a ton, but it's also time to start building your own thoughts on the space. So it's actually a really good question. I appreciate you asking that one. And it's helped level up our content a ton.
We have a lot of folks that they're in a similar situation to you where they're selling to, a highly technical audience or someone that's out of marketing. And you as a marketer, you're in the marketing industry. You don't necessarily have the subject matter expertise that you need for the end user. So you have to figure out a way to bridge that gap. And I appreciate you taking us through your evolution as a marketer from, this sports writer that's working with the NBA champions Toronto Raptors, to where you are today. So I appreciate that, Adam. Well, it's good stopping point there. Where can people go to find out more about you and Klue?
Yeah, man. You can find Klue, klue.com, Klue, and also follow Klue. We're pretty active on LinkedIn too. So the Klue account on LinkedIn is where you can find us. And then me, same thing. You can find me on LinkedIn, Adam McQueen, content at Klue. That's where I talk all things sort of, I do like a mix of like talking about content, my own content journey, and then also starting to talk about compete, talking about product marketing, kind of sharing my thoughts and voice on that too. So that's where you can find us.